Sarah Amandeep, Peppa Pig, has a baby sister. I wonder if we could collect a levy on her. So the question is, what was your favourite kids' TV show when you were growing up? I would go for The Raccoons.
I mean, I can't remember that. I don't know when I was growing up, but when the kids were small, I really loved Pingu. And of course, Thomas the Tank. But Pingu, I think, had a certain edge to it. Amandeep, what were yours?
He-Man, the Masters of the Universe, plus She-Ra as well.
Good choice.
You have won this competition, Amandeep. Hello, all you beautiful people. Welcome to Agonomics with me, David Udall. Each week on this podcast, I'm joined by my AHDB colleagues to look at the economics of agriculture, and I may just have assembled the A-team for this episode. There's been a lot of talk about trade deals of late, with new agreements in place with the US, India, and most recently the EU. So, thinking out loud with me are Head of Economics Sarah Baker and Senior Economist Amandeep Purewal, and I couldn't be happier to have the pair of them with me, as we discuss the impact these new agreements could have on our farmers and levy payers. Don't forget to ditch any bad habits and instead follow and subscribe to this show to make sure you don't miss an episode. New shows drop Wednesdays at midday, and please get in touch. Comment on any of AHDB's social channels or send us an email, agonomics@ahdb.org.uk. Speaking of emails, before we get into the show proper, we've had an email come through into the Agonomics inbox recently from a mysterious person called Jack W, who may be a close friend of the show, may previously been the mysterious Mr. Watts who presented it back in the day. And he says, is David E, I think he means me, over-indexing on the number of barbecues he attends, and what is the impact on red meat demand? Well, I don't think I'm over-indexing on barbecues, because it's like 3 in a month, maybe. I'm probably just under-indexing on interesting things that I can actually say in the podcast and keep on going back to barbecue references. I think red meat demand is happy, but Jack, just because I know you're interested and I know this is the reason that you're emailing, broccoli demand has gone through the roof in the Udall household for barbecues. It's still being done, mate. It's still being done. You're still missing out. So, Sarah, Amandeep, trade deals is what we're talking about this week. Trade deals. And like London buses, you're waiting for one and then 3 come along at once. Well, two and not 3, because 1 isn't a trade deal, is it? The US is not a trade deal. It is a renegotiation of tariffs that would impact trade. So we've got 2 trade deals and a negotiation that's gone on. And even the EU one, is it a trade deal? Not really either. It's more of a kind of we've been estranged and we've come back together. We're kind of like 2 teenage lovers that have had a bit of a tiff and have fallen out because one of them didn't buy the other one the right colour WKD on a Friday night or whatever. That's what I would have fallen out about with my 17-year-old girlfriend probably. And then we're coming back together and we're finding a new way of agreeing, actually, you know what? It's not about WKDs, is it? We're both quite happy with the Bacardi Breezer, and so we're coming back together. That's a very simple way and a very flippant way to describe what's happened with the EU discussions. So let's start with there, because from an agricultural perspective, from a farming perspective, it's actually kind of good news, really, on the headline of it, isn't it? In terms of re-accessing, we always had access, but now we've probably got an easier access back into the European market.
I'd concur with that. Subtract 2 from 3. We're left with one free trade agreement. That's India, isn't it? And the other 2 are sort of rejigs. We focus in first on the EU-UK one. There is still some detail to come out, but on the face of it, we already have a free trade agreement with the EU, and there are 0 tariffs, which is great. Do you remember all back in the bad old days, we were worried about hard Brexit, soft Brexit, medium-baked Brexit, all the rest of it? Relatively speaking, it was welcome that we had no tariffs. Trade is complicated, and it's not just about those tariffs. It's about the practicalities of importing and exporting. And what we quickly found out as a third country exporting to the EU was that there are an awful lot of red tape, can you put it, which was ironic, as a lot of people voted for Brexit to get away from red tape. We found ourselves sort of embroiled in it. but it made it very, very difficult, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises to export across to the EU because of the number of checks, the additional cost of getting export health certificates for any of the meat products, and just the general check supports, the delays, which meant perishable loads, often sort of fell by the wayside, and the general bureaucracy. So I think anything that reduces this trade friction should be welcomed by UK exporters, most definitely. So, yeah, it looks positive. Amandeep, what do you think about it?
Yeah, everything you've said. And also, if you just take it into context we know it's not a new trade deal, and the only one that we've had is with India. But if we just put in a proportion, put it into context, if we look at what it offers a GDP of the UK, basically the renegotiations we've had with the EU probably add about £9 billion a year to the economy by 2030. And India, the deal, which is actually a new trade deal, it's only going to add £5 billion a year till 2030. So even though it's not like a new trade deal, it's actually in terms of value, it's going to offer more to the UK economy. Just based on the fact that it's our nearest neighbour, it's our largest trading partner. So there's nothing to be sniffed at, really.
Then, of course, there's the states, and the bit of the tariff arrangement with the US that interested us as AHDB was that we now have our own tariff to send beef across to the US. It was always really difficult to get beef into the US because we had to share a rest of the world tariff with trading partners that were much closer to the US and could get product there much more quickly, and also with their cost reductions could afford to stick it in bonded warehouses so it was ready as soon as the tariff opened, which meant that basically we faced a whopping great big 46.5% tariff for beef into the US, and now we've got our own quota. It gives confidence, it gives a bit of certainty to UK producers that want to export across to the US.
It has been an interesting view of trade from the US. I mean, we've mentioned it a couple of times, but it's very much around that kind of you need me, I don't need you kind of aspect to trade. A very brutalist way of doing it, and is kind of just a sort of faux negotiation from Trump in a way of just slapping these tariffs on just to force people to do it. You take a super extreme view and it makes people panic. I mean, he played a great game of spoof in that sense, and he's pretty much won that people are jumping up and down to get it fixed. But I wonder overall, like you say, Amandeep, from a EU perspective compared to India, financially it's more. I wonder overall, the sum of all of this, is it actually going to have a significant impact upon agriculture as a whole in the UK? This is my question with all of these trade deals. I think there's individual aspects where it would work, that you get, potentially some benefit long term through malt and Scotch whisky demand of going into India, because it's the largest consumer of whisky, I believe. I might be making that up, can't remember, but one of at best. So there's benefit there. It probably isn't going to impact on a livestock sector or dairy sector significantly. The US, whilst you say, there's a quota, it isn't a huge significant quota, and you talk about how applicable it is to us to use. And the EU, it's going to make our current trade easier. It may increase trade, but it isn't kind of big, bold, massive new access that we've got. So am I being too cynical where I look at it and go, whilst there's an overall economic value to the whole economy, the sum of all of these trade negotiations, trade deals for agriculture, realistically isn't actually that much, other than making the status quo slightly easier? Am I being too cynical with that?
I think probably not. So the win in the US deal was beef access. That obviously makes the beef producers a bit happier in terms of getting use of that quota to go into the US, which we couldn't get. Although we had access to it, like Sarah said, practically we couldn't have access to it because Brazil used to just use up all that quota quite quickly before anyone here got a chance to make use of it. But on the other side, there's a bit of a small bump maybe in terms of what's going to be coming. There's also going to be coming in from the other side, 13,000 tonnes coming in from the US to the UK. And it depends what kind of cuts are coming in. So if they're like high premium cuts for red meat, that could have a proportionally bigger impact on our sort of red meat sector there, because we've got the Australia deals at the same point, which they'll probably be sending their high-end cuts over here as well, plus New Zealand. So does that cause more of an impact to that part of the market? And that's going to be something to watch out for, because, like we said, it's all about the carcass balance and what's coming in, not just meat coming in as a total, it's what cuts are coming in and how they can squeeze certain areas of our market as well.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say agriculture is rarely the sort of pivot on which trade deals are struck. It's often the last bit to be agreed, isn't it? Because it's the most complicated and the area where tariffs are highest. But as Amandeep says, in particular sectors and in particular nuances, it gives producers an alternative market, if you like, to the domestic market. And at the moment, beef producers in the UK are fairly happy. Markets are really, really strong and prices are strong. But in years where that might not be the case, having alternative markets across the globe to send product to is a bit of a safety net, if you see what I mean. It creates a natural bottom to the market by offering those alternatives. But the quid pro quo is the increased access to our markets, as Amandeep outlined there.
I suppose, putting my cynicism to one side, one thing that this does give is confidence and confidence to trade. And we know how important that is because we've spoken about that with regards to confidence leading to investment. And what we've seen from the farming side of the equation, farmers, for a lot of different reasons, are currently not very confident and not very positive on a future outlook. But especially from an EU perspective, I'm sure that this will be met with open arms from the processing supply chain and the on-supply chain in terms of opening up an easier access to the EU market. And so it breeds confidence for those to be able to maybe make longer-term decisions. So there may be a second-order benefit from that to the farming side, that there's more confidence from some of those supply chains in providing into these markets. But it's one of those where trade dynamics can still change. There could still be something else that affects it and moves. So it's never fixed, is it, in a way? It's always a bit of a moving feast when we're talking about trade.
Yeah, it's never perfect, is it? The point about confidence is really important, David. I think over the last few years that farmers have had a number of things thrown at them that's sort of out of the ordinary. So Brexit probably was the first, and then there was COVID, and then there was the hike in input prices, and then there's been the global unrest. And of course, in the background, you've always got climate change, and then the various US scenarios that were mooted and everything, not to mention sort of rapid changes in domestic policy. And I think all of those have undermined confidence. And if we know one thing as economists, it's that confidence underpins investment, and investment drives productivity improvement, and it drives output tomorrow, and it drives improvement and everything. So to get that confidence back up is really critical. But having said that, the investment needs to be in the right places. And I know we spoke about this morning, didn't we, about on-farm investment needs to be in the right places. And the analysis needs to be done about where the best wins for investment are in order to maximise those increases in profitability and productivity, if you like, and some guidance around that, some clarity, consistency, continuity, all those things around the policy environment gives farmers a bit of a buffer against the things that they can't control, like the weather and trade deals and global conflict and so on.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. We talk about trade a lot on this podcast, but it is really important. It's been one of those things that's been hugely in the headlines recently. But we're going to take a little break now to get the latest from the markets, as we always do on Agonomics. And when we come back, we're going to quickly review another aspect of the US trade deal that isn't a trade deal, talking about ethanol, and also we'll be talking about some other work that we've been doing at AHDB in this export realm.
Hi, I'm Tom Spencer, analyst at AHDB, with a look at the UK pork market for the week ending 10th of May 2025. GB deadweight pig prices have seen minor changes over the past 2 weeks, sitting at 205.3 pence per kilogram. EU pig prices have also seen similar consistencies, sitting at the 174 pence per kilo mark 3 weeks on the trot, now at 174.64 pence per kilogram. The UK pig meat import volumes for February show an increase on January's figure and year-on-year, both by 1.4%, likely contributed by the reopening of the German pork export market following their disease outbreak. Domestic production for April was down slightly by 1,100 tonnes, although this figure is consistent compared with year-on-year figures of April 2024. And for the latest data and analysis on red meat, dairy and arable markets, head to ahdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
Hi everyone, Rebecca Wilson here. I'm a sheep and arable farmer from Yorkshire. I also host a podcast and dabble a little bit in social media. On the topic of podcasts, I have just hosted Graham Wilkinson, Chief Executive of AHDB, for their Food and Farming podcast. It's been an absolutely brilliant chat. Some really interesting insights from Graham. You know, we've talked about insights, British produce and what makes it so special, consumers, red tractor, you name it, we've probably covered. The episode will be out very, very soon, so keep your eyes peeled.
So welcome back to Agonomics. In the second part of this, we're going to still be talking about trade. I'm sure there's some of you out there that are going, don't bang on about trade, but I don't care. It's really good to talk about. So we're going to talk about the impact on the ethanol deal that was made with the US. And then we're going to talk about a little bit more of what we've been doing at AHDB in the world of exports. But Sarah, Amandeep, coming back to the US trade deal that wasn't a trade deal, that was the renegotiation of tariffs. A key part of that was around access for US ethanol into the UK market. I mean, this is an immediate concern from a grain perspective because we produce bioethanol domestically from wheat. So we have both Entus and Vivergo on the east coast of England, the northeast coast of England, who have a significant proportion of domestic wheat that they intake. They're also able to bring in imported products. So Entus can use multi-commodities while Vivergo is focused on wheat. But the impact of opening up that market to the US really is just adding a huge level of competition. That means that in a world of extremely tight margins, bioethanol production in the UK may now not be commercially viable, and therefore those plants may stop producing ethanol or produce a lot less anyway. The impact of that from a wheat perspective is evidently going to be pretty strong, that if we take out that demand on the east coast of England, there's going to be a significant reduction in the domestic price because of the shift in supply and demand. You've taken a huge lump of demand out of the market. It is a risk. I think there's still some elements of that ethanol deal that are being looked at. But I suppose it does put into context the challenge, and we even saw it with the EU deal with regards to fisheries as well, in terms of the balance that a government has in terms of making these deals. You often don't get everything your own way. You've got to give a concession somewhere. And in this instance with the ethanol, it may even be that some of those concessions that have been made, the knock-on effects upon agriculture maybe haven't been fully thought through. So it's interesting where some of these things we've been talking about with a trade deal perspective, it's very clear and very specific, but even in wider trade deals, there can still be a negative impact on agriculture.
There's going to be winners and losers, not just only within like different sectors, but even like within the UK as well. So the reason why that part of the deal may have been seen as beneficial from the UK side is that there's a lot of manufacturing sectors that use ethanol. So for them, it's going to be, that's a good thing, because if that tariff is abolished, then they've got a cheaper, raw material coming in for their manufacturing. But then, like you said, for the plants that were making bioethanol in the UK and had already had like low margins to deal with in the first place, that could just make things a lot worse, because obviously you've got more, got cheaper competition coming from the US. That also has a knock-on effect on the sort of the side products from bioethanol production. So animal feed, carbon dioxide, which is, we saw like fairly recently, a couple of years ago, there was like a carbon dioxide shortage, and that kind of affected the food sector as well. So it's kind of other knock-on effects that we've got to take into account as well, just from what happens with certain elements of the deal.
Let's face it, the first thing we were talking about was Peppa Pig's baby sister being born into the world. Poor Evie Pig. Is Peppa Pig's surname Pig? That must be odd. It's like me being called David Human, isn't it? But her new younger sister Evie, she's been brought into a difficult world. Maybe Peppa Pig's younger sister's going to be the one that can save all this. She'll be the voice of reason in all of it. I don't know. Let's hope. Anyway, speaking of voice of reason and useful information, moving on, we've also been producing more work in this world of exports, because over the last few years, in the wake of the initial phase of work that was generated from the EU exit that we had, we looked at export prospects around the world in terms of where we could export our agricultural products to, where markets were increasing, the risks, the barriers, etc. We've come around to review that work, and we focused on the EU being the first port of call to review again. And this is something that you've been working on, Amandeep, over the last few months, isn't it? Sort of developing that piece of work. So do you want to just, I suppose, explain what it is, why we've done it, and when we can expect it?
After we left the EU and free to look at different trade deals, we wanted to have a look at all the opportunities around the different parts of the world for UK red meat and dairy and also cereals as well. And we kind of identified it by looking at what kind of markets are available based on the sort of economic propensity in terms of how much, consumers like to get more wealthy to be able to purchase those high-end products or likes of meat and dairy, and also based on what do they consume already and what is their forecast looking at into the next decade. How much are they likely to keep on growing in that area? What do they think of British food and the sort of reputation in terms of standards, safety, etc., and just the general sort of provenance that's associated with it? And also, how much can be said at the moment? So what do we need to change in the way the market dynamics work in terms of market access and tariff barriers to trade that would help us get more product into those markets? So the whole package, really. And we've already done this work before, which is on the AHDB website, identifying clearly what the most important markets are. As you said, the EU, it's not a new market, but it's by far the most important market, because we know that from everything we talk about today, and also, from historic sort of relationship with them. But further afield, in Asia, China, Singapore, those Far East countries were identified as quite important markets as well, that have really good propensity for growth for our exports, and also the Middle East. Interestingly, India wasn't actually identified as having a good, really, really, really good prospect, but it's something more of a long-term aspect maybe, because rather than in the near term, and by long term I probably mean next 20, 30 years rather than in the next decade or so, because there's still quite a few things to sort out there. So while we have got that sort of deal in place, I suppose, a deal in place, I think there's still a long way to go before we see any really, really impactful benefits coming from that.
And with all of those markets, there's going to be a significant amount of competition that goes into them as well, isn't there? This isn't just us as the UK as the only producer of pork, dairy products, whatever it would be around the world. There's a lot of competition that we're facing into those emerging markets. And it takes time, doesn't it? That's the thing. This isn't something where you can just, go and produce something and off you go. It does take a lot of time to enter into those markets, build sort of critical mass to then move more products. This is very much a long-term aspect, but it's also something from an environmental perspective that we can look at, because there's advantages and promotional opportunities in terms of the environmental sustainability of the produce that we make that we can export to these nations as well. So it is, I think, one of those aspects of looking at agriculture as a whole. There's a lot of facets to how to build a sustainable agricultural system and maximise it. And we will have to export. We'll have to continually export some of the products that we make because of carcass balance and oversupply in certain sectors as well. So I think it's a hugely valuable piece of work that we do to help the industry map out exactly where those opportunities are.
Our export team work very, very closely with the relatively newly appointed agricultural attachés across the globe in order to establish a presence in a market even well before a free trade agreement is signed. The free trade agreement, if you like, is the cherry on top of the icing, on top of the cake. But all the work that goes on before will determine whether trade takes place or not. And it is those relationships and those complicated sort of supply chains across the globe that enable that to happen. The other thing to really, really consider when you're talking about environmental footprints, it's really interesting. If you look at recent narratives, Carbon Budget 7 and Land Use Framework, there's a general narrative that there will be a reduction of livestock, if you like, particularly in the uplands, and the reduction of livestock will be managed alongside a reduction in consumption. But if you, as you so rightly pointed out, if you take into account the fact the UK's credentials in producing red meat sustainably, then is there not an argument that goes alongside that to say that actually perhaps we should be producing more because we're better at it and we can do it more sustainably, and exporting it, because climate change is a global issue, not a national issue, and you do have to look at the bigger picture, and there's clearly some work to do in that area to examine those opportunities and the potential benefits.
You make a very fair point there, Sarah, but what you're not saying is that we're just going to be the only country in the world that can save the global food system.
No, you're right. I think that's spot on. I think the work needs to be done about who has the comparative advantage in terms of sustainability of production of red meat across the globe, and focusing on that. It might be the UK, it may well be other nations. It will most likely be a combination of several, because we have an increasing global population to feed. But given that this is a global issue, let's address it globally and use trade as part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Definitely. That's a nice way to finish, isn't it? Trade is part of the solution, not the problem. Sarah Amandeep, thank you for having a trade discussion with me today and welcoming the news that Peppa Pig has a baby sister. I wonder if that's in the DEFRA's June survey. We'll have to go and ask if they've increased the pig numbers there. For those of you who were listening intently, you would have noticed that we had some obvious and some less obvious song titles that we dropped in today, and the artist was everyone's favourite, although not my favourite Ipswich fan. I've got other favourite Ipswich fans. That would be my friend Tom Barker. You're my favourite Ipswich fan. But most people's favourite Ipswich fan, Ed Sheeran, a fellow ginger as well. So maybe I should be nice to him.